The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Renee Mathis teaches writing, and she teaches writing teachers how to teach writing as a mentor in the CiRCE Institute's apprentice program. Her approach to writing is classical, going all the way back to Aristotle's canons of rhetoric. I wanted to hear more about that, and particularly how Aristotle can help a 21st century writer break through the blocks that can keep a project from gaining momentum. And Renee obliged. Renee Mathis, thank you so much for being on the Habit Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So you are a teacher of writing and a mentor of writing teachers, also a Jeopardy champion, from what I understand.
That is correct.
Tell me about that. We're going to start with the Jeopardy, and then we'll move on to more relevant matters.
Jeopardy is great. It always gives me something to talk to people about in parties. And my introverted family members have confessed to me that they just tell my Jeopardy story because that gives them something to talk about as well. So it was a fun process. I'm so glad I did it. Back in the day when Ken Jennings was winning all of his games, I started a renewed interest in the show. Yeah. And there was a Jeopardy forum online, and he graciously offered to send anyone who wanted it an autographed picture. And so I asked him to please autograph his picture with the message, "Dear Mrs. Mathis, tell your students that learning pays," which he did. And so the more I started learning about the show, I thought, I want to do this. I really think it would be fun to do this. And what a lot of people don't know is that there's a really neat little Jeopardy community. There may be more than one, but there's a community for everything. And I had wonderful, developed friendships and encouragement from the others, how to do the audition, how to study, lots of books to read. We played practice games together. And so I went through the audition process. I took the online test, and then I auditioned in person, where they test you to see if you, I guess, have a personality and can follow directions. And then you wait. And I studied a lot, and then was called to show up in Los Angeles. So my husband and I flew out there. No, they do not pay your way out there.
That's
but
what I've heard.
Guaranteed. Yeah, you're guaranteed at least $1,000 if you get third place.
Uh-huh. And
so I was, I guess you could say, the studying paid off. I am a one-day Jeopardy champion. $7,201.
Okay.
And that was pretty fun. And the next day I didn't do so well. I came in third place, and that was the end of that. Once a Jeopardy champion, always a Jeopardy champion.
There you go. You're like a New York Times best-selling author. If you're just on there for 5 minutes, you get to say that from then on. So you're talking, this was relatively recently that you were on Jeopardy.
It aired in 2008.
Okay.
And the whole process was about 3 years from the time I auditioned till the show aired till I got the money. It was a while. So, yeah. Well,
that's funny. Okay. Well, but we're not here to talk about Jeopardy. We're here to talk about writing and the teaching of writing. So you've taught writing for something like 20 years to younger students and also to adults. And as I mentioned earlier, you mentor teachers through the CiRCE Institute's program. Let's start with the idea of mentoring teachers. One thing you had mentioned to me at one point was that you're interested in encouraging teachers to teach in such a way that it nurtures and builds the gifts of students. It doesn't make them feel beaten down, but rather makes them enjoy writing. Can you tell me more about that? How do you do that?
Sure. So, as part of the CiRCE Institute's apprenticeship program, that anyone could do this. Really, we meet together in a community, in a group. We read together, and my apprentice teachers are writing, and so they're actually working through the same curriculum that they're using with their students. Mm-hmm. And so I help teach them as they're learning this curriculum, but then they are in turn teaching that curriculum to someone else. And so they're learning how to teach, how to present a lesson. They're learning how to assess, but they're also being assessed by me. Mm-hmm. And then we're also learning the importance of just relationships and good conversations that develop and arise as we get to know one another better. And so it's a 3-year program because we spend time with one another. And I think what really appealed to me about this in the beginning was I think I grew as a teacher because there were other teachers who mentored me and came alongside me and said, yes, you can do this. They gave me confidence and they equipped me with specific skills to then use in my own teaching. And so I just love being able to do that with others.
You mentioned conversation. What's the connection between, what do you think of as the relationship between being able to have a conversation and being able to write?
Wow, that's a good question. So we talk a lot about rhetoric and the art of rhetoric and what that means. And I like the definition that rhetoric is pursuing truth in a community. Because if I want to persuade you, there needs to be another person on the other side of that. I can't just be talking to myself. Yeah. And if I'm going to persuade you of something, I need to be able to think through that issue clearly and carefully, which means I also need to learn how to listen to you. Yeah. And we need to listen to one another. And so that idea of a Socratic conversation where, unfortunately, I think Socratic has gotten a bad name over the years. And, we don't use it to mean I'm going to beat you up with how smart I am and I'm going to trap you in some way. Mm-hmm. We look at it as we're pursuing truth together. And that's going to require some conversation and some listening. And it may not happen overnight. It may not happen in the space of one conversation. It may take a while. Uh-huh. Yeah. That's one way to teach. When you have a student who's struggling somewhere, you stop and you talk to them and you try to figure out where that disconnect is and what needs to change. But another way of teaching is what we call mimetic, which is based on imitation. And that, in a sense, is teaching like Christ taught, which as a Christian classical educator is what I want to do. So how did Christ teach? He had people that he was in relationship with, his close ones around him, that when he spoke to a crowd or he spoke to others, he used examples. And he didn't say, words, do this, do this, do this. He said, well, it's like a mustard seed, or it's like a lamb, or it's like a shepherd. He gave people types. And when we teach and we give our students types and examples, they have something to kind of hang that little bit of information on and say, okay, I see this type 1 and I see this type 2 and maybe even a type 3. And now I'm going to compare them. I'm going to see what they have in common. And as I start to see what they have in common, I start to learn what is essential in this lesson that I'm supposed to learn. And so as a teacher, I want to present types so that my students can understand the essential truth that I'm trying to get across to them.
Okay, so your use of the word type, I think you're using that in a specific way that may not be broadly. I think that idea might need some unpacking here. Can you tell me what you even mean by type? Maybe give some examples.
Sure. So, if I'm going to teach a lesson on similes, for example, I could present some examples of similes. And instead of starting the lesson with, okay, kids, today we're going to learn about a simile, and this is what a simile is, and this is how to do it, I might start off by asking them, have you ever compared something? What do you look for when you compare two things? And we might begin the conversation about comparison. And then I might present 2 or 3 similes and say, what do you notice here? Let's compare these things together and see what they can find. And then we talk about what do they have in common? Where are they different? And then we can talk about how comparison adds beauty to our writing. And now they're ready to learn the process of how to write a simile because they've seen it in action. And you can do that with a lot of different ideas. We can talk about justice, and we can talk about different places in our reading where we've read about justice, maybe justice done well, justice not done well. And then we compare them. We try to see what is the essential concept of justice. And we talk about it. So sometimes you're comparing just to learn about an idea. Sometimes you're comparing something, and then that builds itself into a skill that you then learn how to do, like adding a simile to your writing.
Yeah. You use the phrase rhetoric is pursuing truth in a community. And I love that idea. I mean, we tend to think of rhetoric as, one person talking in such a way to manipulate what other people are thinking and try to move them in a particular direction. And, and the pursuit of truth may or may not be a part of that, right? I mean, in other words, I think of a lot of times when we think about rhetoric, it's more about persuading people to the way I think about things rather than let's together find out what's true beyond what either of us think about it.
There can be times, I think, when we can have a conversation about something that, I may not understand well, you may not understand well, but as we talk about it together, we both come to a fuller, deeper understanding. There are other times, I think, rhetoric, when we talk about pursuing truth, I believe in the truth of the gospel, and I want you to know that truth. But I can't beat you up over the head with it. And I can't dishonor you as a human being as I'm trying to explain this truth to you. So we have to know how to do this in such a way that we can have those conversations. And, of course, leave space for the Lord and the Holy Spirit to work.
But it seems to me that even in the case of, you mentioned the gospel, that's a truth that you didn't invent, by the way, and as you... And the fact that it didn't originate with you also means that you can still pursue with other people what some things you didn't already understand about this truth that you didn't invent.
Definitely.
But then the other question, the other thing that comes to mind is more or less by definition. Writing is one person. I mean, I don't have the luxury, and unless I'm doing like instant messaging, that kind of writing, I don't have the luxury of interacting with people. The whole point of writing is I'm going to put these words down that can go out from here, and I can, have something. It's not that much like a conversation when I put it out there. So tell me more about that. How does that truth? And I'm using rhetoric as I'm writing. Am I still pursuing truth in community when I'm doing that?
I believe you are, because even though writing is solitary and may seem one-sided, one thing I really want to get across to my students, and they'll hear me say this a lot, is that we write to love our neighbor and to serve our neighbor. And if you're in my high school class, you're not writing to get a grade from Mrs. Mathis. I want you to write to learn to love and serve your neighbor. And I want to come alongside you as you're learning to do that. So what can we do in our writing to love and serve our neighbor? So one thing we can do is we can learn to use language well so that we can communicate well. And that might mean effort. I love you enough to use a comma in the right place and to spell the word correctly so you can understand what I want to say. We also talk about inviting our reader to join with us in reading what it is that we've offered them. So a word we use as we write essays is the exordium. Exordium sounds like exhort, but it's really not. It really just means a beginning. And I like the term to think of it as an invitation. I am welcoming you into this space and hopefully you'll stay long enough to listen to what I have to say. So how can I connect with you at the beginning in such a way that you will want to come in and sit and listen? There's a popular word in writing education that talks about the opening of your paper or your story or whatever as being a hook. And I don't like that word because to me, I picture some poor little fish with a hook through his cheek being dragged out of a river, and that's violent. Let's be nice to our readers. Let's not hook them and cause them pain. Let's invite them in. So I had a lot of fun teaching that lesson because I used to open up that lesson with asking the kids to tell me about what their front door looks like. And what is it about your front door that invites people to come into your house? And of course, the girls would tell me about the plants and the wreaths and the doormats and the beautiful, curb appeal of their home. And the boys would say, I have a front door. I think there's a doorbell on there. But I think we love our neighbor when we write by thinking of who it is that I'm writing to, who is going to be reading this. How can I love and serve them? If I'm trying to persuade them, how can I acknowledge that they do have a voice in this argument, and I want to acknowledge their side in case it's different from my side. And I don't want to ignore that. So I might include a refutation that says, yes, there is another side of this argument. And this is what the other side says. Let's engage that. Let's talk about it. I think they're wrong, and here's why, but I'm not going to ignore it.
It's so important to, in those kinds of refutations or those sorts of acknowledgments of the other side to summarize those other arguments in such a way that an adherent of that argument would actually recognize it as their argument.
Yes.
And I think we, in persuasive writing, we tend to, people aren't very good at that, right? You're preaching to the choir. You're trying to solidify your base, so to speak, fire up the base instead of actually reach out to people who you disagree with. And I've heard of, now I can't remember what the debating society is, or I think it's one of the Ivy League schools, where that's one of their rules is you have to, if we're going to have this debate, before you make your point, you've got to summarize the other side's point in such a way that the other side says, yes, that is what I'm saying. Instead of arguing, with straw men. What'd you say, Renee?
We have to listen. We have to listen carefully.
Yeah. One thing I try to talk to students about, with some success, with let's say varying success, is trying to convince them that they are entering into a conversation that's been going on a long time, right? And so when you're writing, your freshman English paper, you've already mentioned, you're not just writing the main message of this paper shouldn't be, I'm trying to get Ms. Mathis or Dr. Rogers to give me a certain grade. It's, I'm participating in a conversation that's been going on already. And so both giving them the dignity of saying, you have something to say here, but also, the dignity of saying, you're accountable to this larger conversation. And I thought about that when you said that rhetoric is pursuing truth in a community.
That's really good, because one thing I try to emphasize, and I love the larger conversation. So when we read Homer or we read Shakespeare, we don't come to it, as what am I going to tell Homer after I read it? It's like, what can Homer tell me, and how can I submit to that? And how can I realize that if I don't like this or I don't understand it, it's not Homer's fault. It's my job to rise to the challenge of understanding and finding my place in this conversation.
Finding. So finding your place means both being humble, but also being confident that I actually do have something to bring to this conversation. And it's so much of, now this, we're not talking about freshman English or high school English at this point, but so much, of academic writing becomes, I've got to figure out some way, some angle that I can say something nobody's ever said before, which leads to people saying ridiculous things, right? I mean, one way to be sure nobody's ever said something before is to say something ridiculous.
But I appreciate you gave me that advice too. You said, don't try to be brilliant, but in the process of your writing, maybe you will be able to show your teacher something that they hadn't seen before. Uh-huh. And so as a teacher, I try to be on the lookout for that. I thought that was wonderful advice. Yeah. When a student offers you something and you say, wow, thank you that is a gift. Yeah. That is that I now see this differently. Yeah. It doesn't happen all that often necessarily, just because with young writers, they're starting to, they're just finding their way. But it really is a delight when a young writer does show you something that you'd never noticed before. I mean, I say it doesn't happen that often. You may disagree. Maybe you do find that it happens a lot. Probably more with adults. They have more life experience, to share, to draw from. But even young writers, anytime they offer something, I look at it as a gift. Yeah, sure. They're giving of themselves, and that's a scary thing. They're giving of themselves to a teacher that's got a red pen, and poor teachers. We have our bad reputation that we just bleed red ink all over everything, and we're just out there to play gotcha. You're wrong. Yeah, right. Which isn't true. So anytime that they give me something, I'm so appreciative of that. Yeah, yeah. I'm with you. And the just to see a young writer be willing to just give an account of what they've seen, it really is a valuable thing. And all right, so let's talk about you teach the Lost Tools of Writing, which is a CiRCE Institute product, and y'all teach through the Aristotle's canons of rhetoric. I've got that right, don't I? So tell me more about that, and you're going to I want to sort of zero in on invention once you sort of tell us what the three canons are. Sure. So we look at the first canon of rhetoric is invention, which is coming up with something to say. And I like to explain that as, don't think of it as invention as in I've got to be as smart as Thomas Edison or Alexander Graham Bell and invent something new. Because I thought that I'd probably quit before I started. Yeah. So I like to think of invention as inventory. And so before we write, we need to build an inventory that we can then draw from. And everyone who's ever had a teenager or been a teenager knows when they come home from a hard day at school or practicing sports, the first thing they want to do is eat. And so they go to the fridge and they open it up and they want to see a well-stocked fridge that they can grab and eat really quickly. So with writing, we need to stock those shelves. We need to build that supply. And so we have ways of doing that in invention. And so the first part of the writing process is just gathering ideas. The next stage is the canon of arrangement, which is where we arrange our thoughts. And it can be, in a very structured way, like an outline. That's what we're building toward, to arrange our thoughts in an outline. But before we can even get to the outline, we have to do some other arranging and figure out which side am I going to take? What are my arguments going to be? And so forth. We put that together. And then the third canon that we deal with in writing is elocution. And that is saying it well. That's where we get to have fun with figures of speech and style, but we also include things like grammar and usage, the spelling, all that fun stuff. Yeah. Now, Aristotle had two more canons, which were memory and delivery, which have to do with speaking and oral presentations. So we drop those and we just worry about the written forms. Yeah. So what questions can I answer about invention? Well, I want to know. I want to hear more about how you stock that. How you stock that refrigerator. What you even mean. I mean, because when I speak to writers, whether they're adults or younger folks, that's a big place where people you quit before you start because you don't quite know what to say. So we have that blank page. And so we start with learning to ask good questions. And so the first question that we ask, and again, it's not, this is not a law, it's not the gospel, it's just the way we happen to teach. Sure. I love teaching this way, so of course I'm excited about it. But the first question we might start with is, for persuasive essays, we pick out a character and we say, should he have done this thing? Or should she have done this thing? It's the basic judicial type of essay where you're judging a character on an action.
A fictional character. You're talking about writing a story for an essay in a literature class.
Right. So this is not literary analysis. It's learning how to start with a question and then inventing based on that question. Mm-hmm. But you could ask a question. If I was going to write a story or a short piece about, my house that's being built across the street, I could start with the question, what do I see when I look across the street? Maybe you're going to start a story about a conversation with two people in a coffee shop and you want to write a fictional story. You could start by saying, what does the character in the chair do first? Mm-hmm. And then take it from there. So we start with a question, and then we use something called Aristotle's common topics. And I think there's like 20 of them or something. There's a lot. We use 5. 5 is a doable number. And these common topics, they are like magic and unlocking things, helping us to see things. So not only do I use this when I teach writing, I use this for Bible study lessons. I use it as I'm teaching how to read a book. Because these 5 common topics, just like I said, they're like keys that unlock things. So the first one is we look at comparison. How are things similar? How are they different? We look at definition. What kind of a thing is it? What are its parts? We look at circumstances. What's going on in the area around this particular issue? We look at relation, which is one way of saying cause and effect. What happened before and what happened after. Did what happened before cause this particular thing? And did what happened after, was that a direct result of this particular thing? And then the last thing we look at is testimony, which is, what do eyewitnesses have to say about this particular thing? And that can be eyewitnesses in the story. And then you can also look at the old, expert witness. What would someone outside the story have to say about this particular idea? Yeah. So let's say I'm doing a Bible study and I'm looking at, Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan, and I want to unpack the Good Samaritan. Well, how is this story like his other parables? How is it different? Mm-hmm. What was going on? What are the circumstances around the Good Samaritan's problems? What's the definition of a Samaritan? What's the definition of a priest? What happened before the Good Samaritan was hurt and helped, and what happened afterwards as a result? What do the witnesses in the story have to say? What would the innkeepers say? What did Jesus say about it? Mm-hmm. And by asking those questions, I'm off and running, and I can start making lists, and I can organize my list, and then I'm getting ready to move into arrangement.
So you just got a big pile of stuff there that you can then sift through it and think what's interesting to me, what feels like I can expand on, that sort of thing.
Sifting, like panning for gold. Sometimes you throw out a lot of junk to get to that little gold nugget at the bottom of the pan.
Yeah. So the point isn't to hit all 5 common topics in your finished product. It's to use these common topics as a way of coming up with what feels like the real action here. What can I add here?
Right. And some people, they invent, you might say, by free writing. That's one technique some people use. Mm-hmm. They just write till they figure out what is it that I'm going to say. And then they start picking, choosing, from the nuggets, right? It
occurs to me, you're talking about writing essays, but some of these would be very helpful in story, fictional storytelling.
Absolutely. Because eventually we're going to get to the part in our essay where we're going to open our essay with a section called the narratio. That's, again, part of the classical rhetoric. And I'm going to tell you a little story so that you'll understand the background of the context of this issue. And to do that, I need to learn how to tell the basic story. There needs to be characters. There needs to be a setting. There needs to be a little problem. And so by doing that, we're introducing the idea of story writing.
Yeah. And you said Aristotle had way more than 5, possibly 20 topics. And do you know any of the other ones? I mean, I'm curious what. Yeah, I love the idea of the topics, and I learned this at some point and completely forgot all this. This is really fun to think about it, and the ways that it could open up new possibilities for framing, again, especially nonfiction and that sort of thing. So I want to see the rest of that list. I bet it wouldn't be too hard to dig up.
I will see what I can do.
So the idea is just to get a big pile of stuff, and then the arrangement step is to decide what's in and what's out and that kind of stuff.
Correct. And we're big believers. I am personally also a big believer in structure at this point. So the essay will follow a particular form. There will be these pieces in this order, but I think that's good for beginning writers in two ways. The beginning writer that really struggles and doesn't know what to do, you're giving them this gift of saying, you don't have to invent this. You don't have to worry about this. I'm going to tell you what to do and in what order. And as you use these tools of thinking, it's going to get easier and easier. But for now, we're going to use this particular structure. For the person who thinks, I got to be me, I got to be creative, I just got to do whatever I want, they need to be reined in a little bit and to understand that there is a discipline in writing and that there's a beauty in structure. If I could share a quote with you, I wrote this down. Malcolm Guite was interviewed recently, and he said, quote, "And that's why I write formal poetry, in the sense of using sonnets and villanelles, not only because I think their forms are beautiful, but I write it as an act of defiance against the pseudo-liberty of our age, which thinks that it is only without constraint that you find expression."
That's great.
And I thought, I love Malcolm Guite. Thank you for speaking for the beauty of form. But there is a place for form and structure. And so that's what arrangement is all about. And, I'm sure you probably told your students this too. When you know the rules, you can break them. But first you have to know the rule.
Yeah. Picasso was really good at just regular drawing when he wanted to be. He just, he chose to do something else, but he definitely had nailed down the skills of the artist. So, Renee, are you familiar with the writing book They Say, I Say?
Yes, I found it very helpful in providing specific structure to follow for when you get, where do I go in this paragraph? It's great for college students, especially, or someone writing a research paper who needs to know how to integrate quotes from the other side.
Yeah. It feels in some ways, its approach feels very different from what you're describing in terms of, you're going all the way back to Aristotle and using that classical language. But I love the formulae that They Say, I Say presents that says, here are some ways to, at the sentence level, to structure sentences in such a way that you are participating in the way people argue. And so, it feels so, when you first read it, it feels so formulaic and so limiting. But then you start looking at those formulas and I don't care what you're reading, whether it's, the New York Times op-eds or I don't care what you read, people use these formulas in their, at the sentence level. And we're just plugging in different words into the formula,
The book is valuable because they give types, right? They give you types of, this is what it looks like when you use this particular kind of paragraph. And as a reader and writer, I can look at that and say, okay, now I see what they're trying to do. I see what they're asking of me. And then I can play with it.
Yeah.
Again, the power of good examples.
Yeah. I think actually that book may be the book that helped me understand this way of talking about inviting a young writer into a conversation that's already been going on. Well, good. I'm glad to know that you like that book because it's I didn't know how classical educators felt about They Say, I Say, but
I'm all about a good resource.
What'd you say?
I'm all about a good resource.
That's right. It is a good resource. All right. And I feel like I spent, like in my teaching, whether that's my Thursday night monthly webinars or what we do in the Habit or whatever, I spend a whole lot of time on the canon of elocution and the different ways of being more eloquent. but I want, you're inspiring me to spend a little more time thinking and teaching about invention and arrangement. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, about time for us to wrap up. I always end these conversations with the question, who are the writers who make you want to write? So there's your question, Renee. Who are the writers?
I knew that was coming. So the first one that comes to mind is Rick Bragg, because he writes beautiful stories. I mean, and I'm a Southerner. I'm a native Texan, and now I'm in Louisiana, a family in Tennessee. And I love the way he talks about the South and food. And I mean, I don't know what a grouper is. I don't think I've ever written one, but he wrote this beautiful essay about a grouper sandwich. Yeah. And dogs. He writes about dogs. Yeah. And he just makes me want to tell my family stories. Mm-hmm. And if anyone listening has not ever read Rick Bragg, you need to hear Rick Bragg. You need to hear him read his stories. And he's great on audiobooks. I've never heard him on audiobook. I love his books. And does he still write for Southern Living? I think so. He's got a new one out, and he collection of his past columns. But yeah, once you hear his voice, then you'll hear his voice every time you pick up the page. I love Rick Bragg too. And I think another one, and I know he's been mentioned so many times, but I guess it's just because this is where I am right now in my life. But that's Wendell Berry, because for me, he provokes good questions. He has a collection of poems called Small Porch. And one of his poems starts out, "What was here that you wanted to change?" As someone who's recently relocated and undergone a lot of life transition, I have just been chewing on that question. What was here that you wanted to change? What are we going to change by building this house and moving here? And I feel like he gives me the language to understand the country. You know, I'm a city girl. I haven't spent a lot of time out in nature, but now here I am. And I'm like, what do I do with this? How do I think about it? And I read his books and I start thinking, yeah, okay. I may not agree with every single thing he says, but I love the way he just talks about nature and where we are. And plus the fact that one time I met him at a conference, he spoke at a CiRCE conference, and just to hear him read a story in person and to watch him sit there and sign every single book that was brought to him very patiently. And then get his picture taken with the group of people I was with. You know, so to me, Wendell Berry is a very kind man who wrote books, and now I want to read them because I met him. He's a treasure for sure. Well, Renee Mathis, thank you so much for being here. You have given me some things to think about the way I teach writing, and I will ponder these things in my heart. Thank you. It has been a joy to be with you. Take care.
The Rabbit Room has partnered with Lipscomb University to make this podcast possible. Lipscomb has graciously given us access to their recording studio in the Center for Entertainment and Arts building. We're so grateful for their sponsorship, their encouragement, and the good work they do in Nashville. Special shout out as well to Jess Ray for letting us use her song Too Good as part of this podcast. Visit jessraymusic.com to hear more of her beautiful songs.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
This podcast was produced by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. All our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.